I spent my childhood in a military settlement on the steppes of the southern Urals. When I was 13, my family moved away, and only many years later did my little son and I fly across the entire Soviet Union to return to the places of my childhood.
Начинаем нашу воскресную радиопередачу с добрым утром.
Every summer it was 40 degrees, and every winter it was minus 40 degrees. Whenever we went out, my mother got me dressed very carefully to make sure I didn't catch cold. I immediately started sweating and lost my patience. "Stop fidgeting," my mother said. "It's freezing outside. I'll be done in a tick." My arms stuck out sideways like the wings of an airplane. I was led, or rather carried, outside onto the street. I gingerly took one step forwards, then another, and suddenly slipped and fell over. Behind the walls of snow, the 5-story blocks of flats rose up. Our parents said that if you looked down at the buildings from the air, they spelled out CPSU. "Dad! Dad's home!" He was often away on duty. He conducted military tests somewhere far away on the steppe. He was away from home for a long time, sometimes for a few months. He came home emaciated, unshaven, and in a good mood. He smelled of steppe grass, sun, and wind. My father was still a lieutenant when he took part in a nuclear bomb test on the Tozk range. He was 27 years old and commanded a radio unit. The effect of radiation was tested on 45,000 Soviet soldiers. Dad wrote a book called How It Was. Shortly before his death, he recorded the book on tape.
Территория учения примыкала к Бузулукскому бору. Здесь был заповедник, и чего там только не было, и дикий кабан.
The military range bordered on Buzuluk Forest, a nature reserve. There were wild boar, moose and deer there. It was an extremely beautiful place. In the small wood between the hills, a square measuring about 50 by 50 meters had been marked out with whitewash. Next to it was a spring where we always stopped to drink clean spring water. It was precisely here in this picturesque place that the bomb was to be dropped.
It gradually grew warmer and warmer. Small dirty islands of snow lay on the steppe for a long time, while the young grass grew through the snow. And within just a few days, everything suddenly changed. While tulips began to bloom, and the whole steppe up to the horizon turned into a colorful carpet, spring arrived. My parents had met on a dance floor in the park. My father was a young officer and he danced very well. My mother studied medicine and had to conduct experiments on rabbits. She often felt sorry for the rabbits, and instead of studying and dissecting them, she took them home with her and looked after them. The rabbits multiplied and she released them, but some of them didn't want to leave and came back to us. And that's how we lived. Dad, Mom, my sister, me, and the rabbits. Every spring the officers got ready for the parade. I liked watching them march down the main street. To be honest, it was the only street in our little town. We called it Broadway. I stood in the shadow of the elm tree and watched the officers' cheeks quiver with every step. After the parade, my father and his friends went to a bar. They took off their caps and belts, wiped their sweat off their foreheads, and joked about the fat woman at the buffet. Auntie Zina. They said she'd put washing powder in the beer again. Auntie Zina pretended to be offended, but she ran to the back to pretty herself up and put on her lipstick. The tulips withered, their leaves scattered. It got very hot. Due to the lack of rain, the whole steppe was covered with cracks. All the vegetation was scorched, and the steppe grass blew in the wind like grey hair. The summer began. Along with long-awaited summer holidays. For the first time in their lives, my parents went to the seaside on holiday. They left my sister and me with a neighbor. Auntie Tamara fed us pelmeni every day and got cross if we didn't eat up. Soon afterwards, my father went away for a long time again. I drifted around on the steppe waiting for him to finally come home. But he didn't return for ages.
Это было 14 октября 1954 года. Ровно в 06:00 я сверху получил сигнал. Лед идет. По легенде,
On September the 14th, 1954, it was Reveille at 5 a.m. At 6 a.m. we were already in position. I received the signal, the ice is coming. That meant that the plane carrying the nuclear bomb had taken off from the airfield and set course for our training ground. As 0 hour approached, a series of signals came: storm, hurricane, and finally flash. At the last signal, the soldiers had to put on their gas masks with a protective liner, cover themselves with paper wraps, and lie down in the trenches with their faces on the ground. At 9:33, the bomb was detonated. Through the bunker cracks, I saw a flash as bright as thousands of welding flames. This was followed by a sound like a thunderclap. My poor eardrums. How could they possibly not be harmed? The ground shook. Earth trickled down into my collar from the cover of the bunker. Immediately after the test, the radio unit drove through the whole testing range on a Studebaker to remove the telephone cables. Suddenly, they saw an elk staggering and limping on the road, blinded and stunned by the explosion. They shot the animal dead.
After the unbearable heat, it finally began to rain. It rained day and night, for weeks. Autumn had begun. I went to school. But my father still wasn't back yet. My mother said he was in Burdenko hospital. She told me everything would be fine, but she couldn't help crying. Dad had been badly exposed to radiation during the nuclear tests. He hadn't been allowed to tell this to the doctors, even though he was in a military hospital. The doctors were mystified by his blood parameters. They didn't understand what was wrong with him or how to treat him. At last, my father came home again. And soon afterwards, we left the area I've longed for ever since. The wild countryside, the wind, the endless steppe, my happy childhood. I only heard about the Tozk tests 25 years later, when my father's duty of confidentiality was lifted. Then he began writing his memoirs. I remember dreaming of seeing our military settlement from a bird's eye view, lost in the Orenburg steppe. I wanted to find out at last whether the adults had told me the truth when they claimed that the houses were positioned to spell CPSU. Now I'd be able to see. I gazed spellbound out of the window and strained to make out something between the clouds. Now? Or was there still a while to go? It might be over there. But the dense white layer of cloud revealed nothing. With my own little son, I'm returning to the places of my childhood, to find out more about my father, who's no longer alive, about the people who took part in the tests on the Tozk range, about the inhabitants of the surrounding villages who spent all those years in ignorance about what had really happened there.